To you viewers, before the story begins, please subscribe and ring the bell for this and future captivating stories. Stay till the end, the lesson is worth it.
I remember the rooftop like a memory burned in light. The city spread below us in tiny squares. Claire Whitman stood across from me, cool and composed in her black coat. I handed her the folder with my hands that would not stop shaking. She opened it slowly like a judge reading evidence. When she opened the folder, her eyes flicked to the first page and then the next. Her face changed while she read. At first she looked curious, then polite, then cold. I watched hope and fear turn into something harder. The folder held emails, a receipt, and a bank transfer traced to a vendor who was not a vendor. The air felt thin. Claire looked up from the pages and fixed me with a steady stare. "This is worse than I thought," she said softly. I wanted to talk, to tell her every small thing I had found over the last weeks, but the city noise swallowed my voice. I felt small and brave at the same time. Ethan's name was written on one of the documents, clear as a scar. The man I married had a neat life and a secret life. On that rooftop I knew everything had changed. The partnership I believed in was a lie. Ethan had been good at acting. He smiled at dinner parties, kissed my forehead in the dark, and called me my rock. But the folder showed a second face. A man who took money that did not belong to him and hid it in plain sight. I had given Claire the first piece of paper that would break his world. A cheap hotel receipt sat on my kitchen counter like a dare. I had found it by accident, wedged under the blender when I cleaned that afternoon. It was stamped with the late night time and the name of a downtown hotel. My heart dropped. I held it and tried to reason. Maybe a client, I told myself. Maybe a wrong date. But when I checked his calendar that night, I saw an entry labeled Client Elam at midnight. I took a screenshot and hid it. Late that night Ethan came home smelling like aftershave and cheap coffee. He smiled like always and asked about my day. I tried to ask him about dinner, about the receipt, but he lifted his hands and said he had worked late. He played the hurt husband, pretending not to know why I worried. He asked me to drop it. I could not. My phone pinged then with a corporate expense report alert. It was his corporate card, an unfamiliar entry. Project Helios. The timing matched the hotel stay. I kept breathing but felt something cold in my ribs. This was not a mistake. A small voice inside me whispered that this was the start of a map leading to things far worse than an affair. I paid for the private investigator with a hand that trembled when I handed over the cash. I wanted facts, not feelings. The man I hired smelled like old coffee and knew how to be silent. He promised discretion in 2 days. He called back in 48 hours. I met him in a diner, the kind with vinyl seats and no windows. He slid a thin file across the table without looking at me. Inside were bank statements, offshore transfers, and a shell company name. There were notes that linked payments to a vendor tied to Ardent Solutions. He said, "He's not just cheating on you, Maya. He's laundering company money." The words hit like a blow. I had expected betrayal at home, not criminal work in the boardroom. He handed over a printout of a wire transfer and pointed to a middleman account number. My throat closed. I thought of late nights, apologies, and the quiet way Ethan had taught me to trust him. The PI told me they had traced small regular transfers that stopped when Ethan was under scrutiny. My hands were shaking so hard the napkin on the table fluttered. This was no longer personal, it was dangerous. I left the diner feeling both terrified and strangely relieved. I had the beginning of proof. I called Ethan from my car because I could not face him at home. My voice shook, but I tried to sound calm. I asked about the hotel and the transfers. He laughed softly, the sound like a knife. He told me I was being dramatic and that I needed rest. He gaslit me into apologizing for accusing him. I felt small and foolish on the phone until he slipped. He bragged in a quiet, arrogant way about keeping things in the family, and then said, "Claire knows." My heart lurched. I asked him to repeat it, and he did, slower this time. He said it as if it were a secret badge of honor. I told myself I should hang up, but instead I kept him talking. I pressed record. The moment went strange. Over the line there was a soft click I did not expect. After a pause, I heard a whisper of a name I did not know. It was a low sound like a thread being pulled. I drove to a parking lot and played back the call, hearing his own voice bragging, and that whisper made everything sharper. I realized then he believed he could hide in plain sight and that others had taught him how. I opened Ethan's laptop when he left for work. My hands felt guilty and strong at once. I told myself I would not cross a line, but the draft email in his outbox swallowed my restraint. It was addressed to Claire. Ethan begged her to shelter a set of expenses and promised loyalty in return. He used words like protect and confidential, as if dealing in favors and favors alone. The draft had an attachment labeled Helios Contracts, Final. I took screenshots before I knew how long I would need them. The betrayal was deeper than nights and lies. He had traded loyalty for cover. The text on the screen looked cold, neat, and practiced, like a plan hatched on many late evenings. I sat frozen with the glowing screen and the soft hum of the apartment. The more I read, the more I saw. There were footers, client names, and invisible hands that moved money like chess pieces. I closed the laptop and felt hollow. I had proof Ethan was not a foolish man in love. He was a careful man who could build a lie large enough to hide a whole network. The charity gala felt like walking into another life. Everyone moved like a film set under warm lights. I held the folder tight under my arm and watched Claire from across the ballroom. She looked like a person who had made hard choices and survived them. I waited until she was alone in a corner booth, and then sat without announcing myself. She read the first pages and did not flinch. She asked me small questions and listened to my answers like a surgeon. Then she said, quietly, that she had suspected irregularities before but never had proof. Her voice was tired. She offered a whisper that sounded like both warning and promise. If this is true, I can help, but it will change everything. My heart flipped at the fear and relief in her words. She wanted to investigate, but she warned the truth would cut deep. As we spoke, her phone buzzed. I saw the message on her screen for a moment. Meet me in my office after hours. The word after hours felt like a code. I left the gala with a new kind of plan. The world had changed from private pain to public risk. I walked into the night with the folder under my coat and the city like a quiet witness. Claire gave me a way into their audit group. It was controlled access, not full exposure. She called it an investigator lane. Employees could drop documents there with encryption and anonymity. I felt both grateful and scared. We worked with a small internal audit team who accepted the folder and added it to their queue. Days later, they brought back evidence that made my stomach drop. Ethan was not just a lone bad actor. He was a middleman tied to vendors, a web that touched a board member, and a shadow budget used for things no one talked about. Claire said, looking at me like she had seen many storms, "If we expose him, we might topple a lot of people." I swallowed. The audit uncovered a payment that used my maiden name as a false vendor account. It looked like someone had tried to hide a payment to a fake entity named after me. Panic and anger mixed in my chest. The audit team warned me about leaks and legal risks. I felt the part of me that had wanted to protect my family wobble. Now I understood the scale. Names I trusted, money moved like smoke, and a plan that reached very near to home. I found out Ethan had recorded our counseling sessions. I had believed he wanted help. Later I learned he wanted ammunition. The man who had held my hand in a tiny therapist office used that trust as material. I listened to one recording and felt sick. He practiced lies against me, shaping his words to sound concerned while planting doubts about my mental health. The first time I heard him do that, I nearly threw up. Then, in a counseling playback, he mentioned a name, Baxter. He had talked about an executive who demanded a cut. The voice sounded ordinary, bored even, but the line was a key. I paused the clip, heart pounding. The PI tracked us to a security camera that showed Ethan leaving the counselor's building at 2 in the morning, holding an envelope. I watched the black and white footage and felt a cold drop in my gut. He had gone somewhere after that session, under the cover of night, with paper in hand. The recordings and the camera made a grid of facts that felt impossible to deny. I realized he had been preparing a long campaign to protect himself and to use our life as a weapon. My office was ransacked one morning. It was not random. Drawers were opened and paper strewn, but nothing valuable was taken. Instead, someone had rifled through folders tied to the Helios project. They left a smear of red paint on my desk like a warning. I found a single glove thrown into a trash can. My phone buzzed with a message from the PI. He sent a photo of a car parked in the alley the night before. The license plate traced back to a company contractor. Panic rose hot and sharp. Whoever touched my work wanted to scare me. They wanted me to know I was not safe. I called Claire and she arranged for security to sweep the building. I changed my locks that day and slept with lights on for a week. The smear on my desk felt personal, as if someone wanted to leave a mark. Each small detail fit into a picture I had been building. Ethan was not only skilled at hiding money, he knew how to plant fear. I felt both fragile and strangely fierce. I began to organize my proof like a map, and to plan a way forward that would not let him scare me into silence. I did not post anything explicit, but I needed something. I took a black and white photo of a locked file in my drawer and posted it without words. Truth is heavier than secrets. I did not expect much, but the tiniest ripple reached a local reporter who messaged me through a protected channel. He said an anonymous tip had pointed to a possible ardent whistleblower. I kept my replies short. He sounded careful and curious. I learned that Ethan went on camera later that week and called his accuser vengeful and unstable. His words spread like an oil slick. The reporter wanted to meet in person and promised to protect my identity for a fee, not money, but a condition that made my skin prickle. He wanted my interview to stay anonymous until he had more proof. I hesitated. I did not know if I could trust a reporter's promise, but I also knew we needed someone outside the company to listen. I agreed on terms that felt safe. No names on the first run, and a legal buffer if the story blew back. It was a small step into the public light, but the darkness we were up against left me little choice. The anonymous tip found its way into the right inbox. A whistleblower platform received a package with internal invoices and a copy of my screenshot. Forum threads lit up and journalists began to spin wheels. Ardent stock dipped on the small newsfeed that afternoon. Pride and fear warred inside me. I wanted to keep everything private, but the leak validated what I had been collecting. My attorney called and said the board had asked for an emergency forensic audit and wanted to meet Claire privately. The news felt like walking into a storm with only paper shields. I met with my lawyer, who told me about legal risks and how to prepare. He said the louder the rumor mill, the higher the chance Ethan's lawyers would swing at me. I rehearsed answers, gathered documents, scanned receipts, and kept copies safe at a friend's house. I felt like a small boat in big water, but the current shifted in my favor as the company took notice. They would investigate, and that might pull other threads loose. I slept little. My dreams were full of numbers, emails, and the quiet way Claire's eyes had changed when she read the first page on the rooftop. When they suspended Ethan, I felt a cold relief and a fresh fear. He fired back with the kind of anger that tastes like vinegar. He filed for emergency temporary custody of our child, painting me as unstable and vengeful. The court papers arrived like a slap in the face. All his legal maneuvers came fast and loud. I felt my world tilt. My lawyer told me his tactic was to weaponize the scandal against me, to make me look irrational so the court would consider my parenting unsteady. I realized then our battle was not only about dollars and jobs. It was about who would control our child's life. I gathered everything that tied his motive to the company scandal. If I could show the judge that Ethan had manipulated money and people to hide his crimes, his custody claims would look like a last-ditch play. The hearing was set for the same day as the company's emergency board vote. My heartbeat matched the clock. I felt a cold determination that this fight would be thorough and public. I would not let his manipulations take my child or my truth. The prenup felt like paper armor until I learned how it had been forged. Ethan's counsel waved it like a clean shield meant to keep me poor and quiet. The clauses were precise and mean. My attorney dug deeper and found an old email where Ethan bragged about making sure she signed. He had leaned on me in small ways I had not recognized. The email showed pressure and implied threats. My lawyer said that made the prenup coercion possible to argue in court. We started building the case. Phone logs, witnesses who remembered the night he insisted I sign in a hurry, and a bank record showing he threatened to cut off funds. Each piece chipped at the prenup's armor. It felt like I was scraping away a false skin to find the truth below. The prenup might not hold if we proved coercion with his own company emails and the pattern of his behavior. I felt a mixture of horror and hope. The wedding day had been full of promises and small compromises. Now those small moments mattered in a way I had never imagined. Ethan tried to smear me. His team planted old social posts and a fake story about instability. They found a man willing to claim he had dated me long ago, and then turned on me. The first wave hit like garbage thrown at a window. My phone lit with ugly messages. I felt small and angry. I fought back with facts and with a recording where Ethan admitted staging narratives to protect himself. I released the clip through my attorney. It showed him discussing a plan to make me look unstable if trouble ever came. The smear began to lose power. People started asking who would benefit from discrediting a woman with proof of her husband's crimes. The narrative that tried to make me the villain found fewer ears. Then a new package appeared on my desk in a plain envelope stamped with a corporate seal and the words "Do not open." I kept it closed and called Claire. This was escalation. Someone wanted me threatened and boxed in. My fight was no longer private. It raced through boardrooms and social threads. Claire faced a choice. The board offered her a quiet promotion and a promise of silence if she kept the scandal contained. She could protect her career and hush the mess, or she could speak. She chose conscience. One afternoon she invited me to a small conference room and said she would testify about the payments and the chain that led to Ethan. Her voice shook with the strain of the decision, but she was firm. I felt a deep gratitude. We both knew how dangerous that choice was. At the board meeting, Claire stood and presented the evidence. For a moment, a motion to keep everything internal looked likely. Someone Claire had trusted unexpectedly seconded the hush motion, and the room filled with low voices. When the vote split, the room changed. Supporters and skeptics argued. I watched men and women I had never met decide the fate of our company and my life. The second that vote happened, I knew that this was no longer just my personal conflict. It was a company crisis and a test of who would put truth over self-preservation. The mole turned out to be closer than anyone expected. Liza, Ethan's sister, worked as a finance analyst and had access to ledgers. She came to me in tears and said she was complicit out of fear. Her voice was thin and ashamed. She handed over a recording in which Ethan admitted forging approvals. Hearing his voice spell out the fraud made my stomach flip. Liza explained she had been scared when he told her he would ruin anyone who crossed him. She said she had been paid small sums and threatened if she spoke. I felt a mixture of anger and sorrow for her. She agreed to help but asked for immunity. When I told our lawyer, he warned that immunity would be tricky, but also that Liza could be key. Then came a death threat to Liza. A dark note telling her to keep quiet or suffer consequences. The fear that had silenced her became real. We had to protect her if we wanted her testimony. I realized betrayal often sat with shame and fear, and that people sometimes do wrong because they are scared, not evil. Liza's evidence moved the case forward but also made the danger more immediate. When Ethan's mistress filed an affidavit, I felt the ground tilt. She had been promised silence and then betrayed. Her words were honest and raw. She wrote how Ethan bragged about using company funds as leverage. She included a voicemail where Ethan spoke plainly about the plan. Hearing that voicemail broke a piece of his armor. The mistress's affidavit was hard to ignore because it came from inside his softest lies. Ethan's lawyer scrambled to seal it, but it was already part of the legal record. Her testimony showed his pattern. He promised people protection and then used them to hide his tracks. The affidavit also gave details about where he kept documents and who else he had trusted. It was a dangerous move for her, but it unspooled more truth. I felt a strange compassion for her. I knew what it meant to be used in a secret life. Her courage turned the tide. Suddenly Ethan seemed less in control, and more like a man flailing as his own web burned. The boardroom shuddered like a ship in a storm. An independent regulator hinted at a criminal probe, and the company's stock wavered. News outlets smelled blood. Some shareholders demanded Claire's resignation for letting this happen on her watch. In that tense meeting, Claire produced an internal video showing Ethan negotiating bribes with a vendor. The footage was quiet and damning. One board member resigned in disgrace when his involvement came to light. The room filled with people who had to choose sides. Someone expected to back Ethan was suddenly absent from public events, and rumors started that he had disappeared. The company felt like something being torn in half. I watched as alliances shifted and old loyalties crumbled. The regulator's shadow made everyone nervous. The board had to decide whether to come clean to regulators and face criminal inquiry, or to try to bury the story. Claire's footage made it harder to hide. The company that had been my husband's second life was now on the brink of losing its first one. Ethan panicked. He tried to move money overseas, but the transfers flagged red. He bought a last-minute ticket and a burner phone. For a brief moment I imagined him running like a ghost, but he did not get far. Security spotted him at the airport and radioed ahead. He never boarded. My phone buzzed with news from the PI. He had been detained and questioned. The man who had tried to act like a puppet master was suddenly exposed as a cornered animal. I felt a strange mix of pity and triumph. Watching his panic unfold, I understood how carefully built lies unravel when the smallest thread is pulled. Authorities froze accounts and tracked movements. Ethan's name was now a headline in small feeds and whispers in boardrooms. He had tried to flee and had failed. I thought of our life and how strange it was that the man I had loved could become someone who would run. The failure of his flight felt like a symbol. His control had slipped, and with it his plans. A judge signed an emergency asset freeze. Ethan's lawyers screamed about sabotage, but the evidence kept piling up. My attorney dug deeper and found an email chain that tied Ethan to payments from a senior executive labeled consultant fees. The email named the company treasurer as a recipient as well. That chain pulled another name into the net. The more we found, the more the picture showed a hand that reached into the board's decision-making. It was no longer a single rogue employee. The treasurer's name in the chain meant the cover-up had people with authority. Ethan's team tried to freeze my accounts in retaliation, but we had legal buffers. The frozen assets meant neither of us could touch certain funds, which felt like being trapped in a slow fight. I began to organize our evidence into a narrative we could show the court. A map of transfers, forged approvals, and collusion. Each email added weight. The treasurer's involvement made me realize how high the corruption climbed. I wrote lists and checked them twice and felt a small tremor of fear for what might come next. Court felt like walking into a theater where everyone whispered. Ethan raged and denied things loudly. Claire sat impassive until the moment she stood. She walked to the witness box and told the judge about payments and forged approvals. She handed the Helios contracts to the bench. The judge looked through them and ordered a forensic hold. The courtroom murmured like a hive. Ethan lunged for his phone and muttered that he had one more card. I held my breath, feeling the same cold rush I had on the rooftop. The judge ruled to keep certain evidence sealed and scheduled forensic testimony. The energy in the room was electric. A few people craned to look at Claire, who had spoken like someone cutting a rope to free a trapped animal. I felt exhausted and oddly cleared. My life had become something open and legal and public, but it meant the truth was out. The judge's orders to hold evidence made me feel safer. Still, Ethan's threat hung in the air. He had said he had a final move, and I knew he could still pull surprises. When a whistleblower site posted internal emails, the story exploded. The feeds lit up with people dissecting names and threads. Videos and threads formed overnight, and the company's PR was drowning. The CEO tried to pin the mess on middle managers and make Ethan the scapegoat, but a leaked clip surfaced of the CEO asking Ethan to make problems go away. The footage undercut the new PR narrative hard. The SEC opened a formal investigation, and the company's legal counsel resigned. The legal halls whispered about criminal exposure. News anchors repeated emails and presented timelines. I watched the public conversation with a strange sense of relief and sorrow. Public justice can feel brutal and cleansing at once. People who had once cheered Ethan on online now questioned their trust. The company's defenses crumbled as each leak found a new hole. The SEC's presence meant the stakes were no longer only civil. My lawyer told me to prepare for subpoenas and long testimony. I felt tired but steady. The leaks made the truth a public thing, and that meant I could walk without the fear of being alone in that dark. Claire had been saving a video as insurance, and when she pressed play in the boardroom, the room grew very quiet. The clip showed Ethan in a late-night meeting discussing forged signatures, blackmail, and planting evidence against me. His voice was ordinary and cruel. I watched and felt a strange detachment, like watching a movie of my life. Ethan panicked and rushed to delete backups, but a forensic snapshot existed. His phone filled with frantic texts telling him to run. A new affidavit from an internal accountant landed in our counsel's inbox and confirmed the video. The accountant attested to seeing Ethan authorize payments with forged paperwork. Each new piece tightened the net. I felt like a person who had been walking blindfolded and then had the blindfold cut away. The truth was awful and powerful. I thought about what justice might look like and what it would take to reach it. The pieces were assembled and the final net was closing. I remembered the night on the rooftop when Claire had first said, "This is worse than I thought." Now the scope was obvious and hard. Ethan made a last desperate play. He created an anonymous dossier with falsified claims meant to blackmail me into silence. It was ugly and mean, full of lies that tried to twist truth. I packed the paper and its metadata and walked into the district attorney's office. The assistant looked at me with a mixture of pity and respect. I handed over the dossier and the logs proving Ethan's authorship. The DA read and sat up straight. "You understand what this means for him, right?" she asked. I did. I knew it could mean indictments, arrests, and ruined names. I also knew it could mean protection and an end to his games. The DA promised to investigate. We coordinated a plan to turn his final play into evidence against him. In the weeks that followed, nothing felt normal. But something firm settled in my chest. I had chosen to step into a public system that could bring accountability. It was a slow and terrifying route, but it was the one that would keep my child safe and make sure truth had a place to stand. The divorce trial became the arena where everything met. Assets were frozen, counsel withdrew, and criminal referrals arrived. Claire, Liza, the mistress, and the accountant testified. The prenup's coercion was exposed with emails and witnesses, and the judge ruled it invalid. Ethan was indicted on fraud charges. The judge awarded me a settlement that secured our child and stripped Ethan of hidden funds. I watched him let out with the quietness of someone who had lost both face and power. After months of fear and nights filled with evidence and meetings, I started a nonprofit to help others exposed by corporate and family betrayal. I stood in a small rented office with a key in my hand and looked out over the city rooftop where I had first handed Claire the folder. The skyline was the same, but my heart was different. I pressed the office door open and whispered, "We did it." The ache remained, but so did a steady freedom. The partnership I thought I had was a lie, but the life I chose next was mine, made honest by truth and hard work. The rooftop where I handed Claire that first folder still holds the same cold wind, but now it tastes different. It tastes like the salt of late-night phone calls and the clear air after a long storm. The nonprofit sign hangs in a small office window not far from that ledge. A quiet promise to anyone who has ever been silenced by power and shame. We offer legal referrals, safe reporting guidance, and a place to start again. Some nights I still hear the echo of every whispered threat in every courtroom silence, but those sounds are now the drumbeat that pushed me forward. Justice didn't fix everything, but it bought us space to breathe and the chance to build something honest for our child. This was never just my story. It became a reckoning for a company, a handful of people who chose courage over comfort, and a community that held me up when I feared I would fall. Claire, Liza, the accountant, the one who finally chose truth, none of them sought praise. They wanted only to stop the harm. If this story moved you, stay with us as we turn the lessons into action. If you want more behind-the-scenes documents, interviews with the people who testified, and practical resources for whistleblowers and survivors of financial abuse, subscribe to the newsletter. Your support helps us keep the nonprofit running and keeps this conversation alive.
Please help this story reach others. Like this post if you believe truth matters. Likes help us reach people who need to hear this. Share it with someone who might be brave enough to speak up after they read it. Subscribe to receive exclusive updates, raw documents, and legal mental health resources that we don't publish anywhere else. Comment below, I want to know what struck you most. Who did you empathize with? What would you have done differently? Thank you for watching, for standing with the truth, and for helping us turn a painful ending into a purpose. The next chapter is about rebuilding, and we can't do it without you.